She hid her true identity for years. The Alpha King recognized her with one single touch. Mara Ellison woke up at 4:30 every morning without an alarm. She did not need one. After 7 years of early shifts, her body had learned the schedule better than any clock. She would rise in the dark, wash her face with cold water, pull her hair back into a tight bun, and put on her gray work uniform before the rest of the city had even turned over in its sleep. She liked it that way. The early hours were quiet. Nobody looked at you too closely in the dark. She worked at the Grand Celestine Hotel, a large and expensive building in the center of a European city she had chosen specifically because she knew no one there. She folded linens. She restocked bathroom shelves. She pushed her cart through long, carpeted corridors and knocked on doors with the same soft knock every morning. She was polite when guests spoke to her. She smiled the right amount. Then she moved on. Her coworkers thought she was shy. Her supervisor thought she was reliable. Nobody thought much more than that, which was exactly what she had worked so hard to become. Mara Ellison was very good at being forgotten. But that was not her real name. She had been born Amara Delacroix, in a large, walled family home surrounded by trees and guards, and the kind of silence that only comes from power. Her father, Chief Edouard Delacroix, was a man who did not need to raise his voice to be obeyed. He ran his household the same way he ran everything else, with precision, with expectation, and with very little room for disagreement. Amara had grown up understanding two things clearly. The first was that she was loved. The second was that the love came with a plan attached to it. From a young age, she was educated carefully. Private tutors, language lessons, protocol training. She learned to speak French, English, Portuguese, and her family's native dialect with equal fluency. She was sent to Paris at 18 for university, where she studied international relations and wore the same composed expression in every room she entered. People found her impressive, a little distant, difficult to fully reach. She had been taught to present exactly that version of herself. When she returned home at 22, her father sat her down in his formal sitting room and explained the arrangement. There was a man. He was from a respected family. He was 44 years old. The union would strengthen two important relationships and secure a piece of land that had been a point of tension for decades. Her father spoke about it the way he spoke about everything, as if the conclusion had already been decided and the conversation was simply a formality. Amara sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap, and said nothing. She had always been good at saying nothing. That night, she packed one bag. She took her passport, the secondary one, issued under a name variation she had once used for a low-profile student trip. She withdrew a modest amount of cash from an account her father did not know about, money she had saved carefully over years, without knowing exactly why. She left before sunrise. She did not leave a note. She did not make a phone call. She simply walked out of the compound, got into a taxi, and began the long process of becoming someone else entirely. She chose the name Mara Ellison, from two ordinary-sounding words she liked the sound of. She chose a city far enough away to feel safe. She chose the most invisible job she could find. She chose disappearance, and she was very good at it. 7 years passed. She was 29 now. She had settled into her life the way water settles into a container, taking the shape of it completely, leaving no visible gap. She had a small apartment 15 minutes from the hotel. She had a neighbor named Claudette, who brought her soup when she looked. She had 3 colleagues she ate lunch with on Tuesdays. She had a library card and a favorite corner table at a cafe 2 streets away. It was a quiet life. It was a safe life. She did not let herself think too often about what she had left behind. When thoughts of her father crept in, his voice, his hands, the way he always smelled of cedar wood, she pressed them down firmly and redirected her mind to something practical: the linens, the cart inventory, the next floor. She was, by most measures, fine. Then the summit was announced. The Grand Celestine had been selected as the host location for a private international gathering. Government officials, diplomatic delegations, and a small number of traditional leaders who held significant influence in their regions. Security arrived 3 days early. The floors were swept. Staff were briefed. Several employees were temporarily reassigned to other duties. Mara was not among them. Her supervisor, a practical woman named Helene, told her simply that she was too quiet to concern anyone. The security team had approved all long-term background-checked staff. Mara had been there 6 years. Her record was spotless. Nobody was worried about the woman with the linen cart. Mara had laughed softly at that and gone back to work. On the second day of the summit, she was working the upper floor, the one reserved for the most senior attendees. She moved carefully, staying close to the walls, timing her movements to avoid the clusters of suited men who walked in tight, purposeful groups, with earpieces and serious expressions. She had just finished restocking a bathroom at the far end of the corridor when she heard a different kind of movement behind her. Slower, more deliberate, and somehow quieter despite the number of people involved. She turned her cart around and began pushing it back toward the service elevator. The man appeared around the corner at exactly the wrong moment. He was tall, with a calm face, and the kind of posture that looked entirely natural, and yet was clearly the result of a lifetime of being told to stand straight. He wore a dark suit with a small gold pin on the lapel. He was not rushing. He never appeared to rush. The 3 men behind him, however, were moving quickly, speaking in low voices about a room number discrepancy. Mara came around the corner and walked directly into his path. The towels went first, a full stack of them, sliding off the top of her cart and landing on the floor between them in a soft white heap. She reached down immediately, already forming the apology in her mouth, already preparing to be invisible again. He crouched at the same moment she did. Their hands landed on the same folded towel at exactly the same time. She felt him go still before she looked up. When she did, she found him looking, not at her face, but at her hand. Specifically, at the base of her right thumb, where a small pattern of raised skin sat in a shape that she had been told as a child was a beauty mark. Her grandmother had called it the family signature. She had never thought much about it. He looked up at her face, then back at her hand. Then he said something that stopped every thought in her head completely. He said it quietly, in the exact dialect she had not heard spoken aloud in 7 years. The dialect of her childhood home, of her grandmother's kitchen, of the formal ceremonies she had attended as a small girl in a stiff dress. He said, "You carry the mark." The world did not spin, it simply became very, very still. She stood up, he stood up with her. His security team had stepped forward, but he raised one hand without looking at them, and they stopped. He looked at her with an expression she could not fully name. It was not triumphant, it was not threatening. It was something closer to recognition, the look of someone who has found something they did not expect to find, and is now deciding very carefully what to do with that. "My name is Adayaze Nwachukwu," he said, in careful, quiet English. "I think you already know who you are." She did not run. She was not sure why. Every practical instinct in her body said to push the cart away, get into the service elevator, and be someone else, before he could say another word. But something about the way he spoke, without urgency, without threat, as if he were simply stating a fact, kept her feet where they were. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. He nodded slowly, as if he had expected exactly that answer. "Of course," he said, "I will be on this floor for another hour. If you change your mind about that, I am in room 412. Then he turned and walked down the corridor, and his team followed, and she stood alone with her cart, and her pile of towels, and the feeling of her own heartbeat very loud in her ears. She did not go to room 412. She went to the service stairwell and sat on the top step for 11 minutes. She counted them. Then she stood up, smoothed her uniform, and went back to work. But she could not stop hearing those 3 words. He had spoken them in her grandmother's dialect. He had looked at the mark on her hand, a mark she had never shown to anyone, never explained, never thought to hide, because she had never imagined anyone would recognize its meaning outside of her family's private world. She spent the rest of her shift in a state of careful, controlled attention, the same way she had gotten through difficult things her entire life. One task at a time, one corridor at a time. Do not think further ahead than the next door. At the end of her shift, she went home. She made tea. She sat by her window and watched the street below, and thought about her father's cedar wood smell, and her grandmother's voice, and the compound walls that had always felt like both protection and a cage at the same time. Then she got up, put her coat on, and went back to the hotel. Room 412 was quiet. She knocked twice. He opened the door himself, which surprised her. His security team was visible in the background, but kept their distance. He stepped aside and gestured for her to come in, as if he had been expecting her at exactly this hour. She stood in the center of the room with her coat still on, and her arms folded. "How do you know that mark?" she asked. He told her. He explained the tradition calmly and without performance, how certain royal families in the region had for centuries documented specific physical identifiers in their lineage records, not as mysticism, but as practical identification in a world where written records had not always been reliable or safe. The raised pattern at the base of the thumb, present in certain bloodlines, had been recorded in scrolls, cross-referenced across generations, and briefed to allied royal houses as a means of recognizing one another during uncertain times. His own advisors had, years ago, briefed him about the Delacroix lineage and the matter of the missing heir. It had circulated among a small number of royal houses as a quiet diplomatic concern. Her family had never made it public, but the knowledge had traveled, carefully, through channels that existed exactly for situations like this one. He had not come to the hotel looking for her. He had simply looked down at her hand and known. She listened to all of this without moving. Then she said, "And what do you plan to do with this information?" "Nothing," he said, "unless you want something done." She studied his face for a long moment. "I left," she said. "I left on purpose. I had reasons." "I know," he said. "I am not here to argue with your reasons. I am just a person who recognized another person and felt it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise." She sat down. She was not sure when she decided to do it, but she sat down in the chair across from him, and she told him everything. She told him about the arranged marriage, about the night she left, about the years of careful invisibility, about Mara Ellison and the gray uniform and the early mornings, and the neighbor who brought soup. She told him about the exhaustion of it, not the work itself, but the weight of being no one, of pressing herself down every day into a shape small enough to go unnoticed. She told him she did not regret leaving, but she said it in a voice that was tired. He listened without interrupting. He did not offer easy comfort. He did not tell her what she should do next. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There is a difference between hiding from your family and hiding from yourself." She had no answer for that. But the words stayed with her in a way that felt important, like a door she hadn't noticed before that was now slightly open. She did not make any sudden decisions. Amara Delacroix, because that was who she was, even if she had spent 7 years insisting otherwise, had always been a careful person. She thought in complete sentences. She considered consequences before she acted. She did not rush. Over the following weeks, through a series of careful and private steps, she began the slow work of re-emerging. Not on her family's terms, on her own. She contacted a legal intermediary first, a neutral party with no loyalty to either side, and established the conditions clearly. She would confirm her identity. She would acknowledge her lineage. She would not, under any circumstances, be treated as a matter for other people to resolve. The response from her father came slowly. When it came, it was not what she had expected. He was not angry. He was old now, and not entirely well, and whatever anger had perhaps existed in the early years of her absence had softened into something more complicated. He had feared she was dead. He had lived with that possibility for years. The fact that she was alive, working in a hotel, living quietly, choosing her own days, turned out to be something he could accept more easily than she had expected. The arranged marriage was long gone. The man had married someone else 4 years prior. The land agreement had been settled through other means. Her absence, in practical terms, had caused less damage than she had spent 7 years assuming it had. She did not move back home immediately. She stayed in the city for another full year, this time under her real name, learning what it felt like to be known again. She found it strange at first. Then, gradually, it became easier. Her neighbor Claudette did not seem particularly surprised. She just brought more soup than usual for a few weeks, and said she had always known there was more to Mara than met the eye. Amara eventually found her way into work that used everything she had. Her languages, her understanding of different worlds, the education she had been given, and the education she had given herself on the floors of a hotel for 7 years. She built a life that was hers, in a way her old life had never quite been. She and King Adiaze kept in contact. She did not speak publicly about what had passed between them in room 412. Some things did not need an audience. People who had worked alongside Mara Ellison were surprised, when the truth came out, by how ordinary she had seemed. She had been so quiet, so unremarkable, just a woman with a linen cart who knew every corner of every floor. She smiled when she heard this. She said the years of being ordinary had been the most honest years of her life. She had learned what it felt like to exist as just a person, not a name, not an arrangement, not a symbol of anything other than herself. She had learned the weight of her own thoughts without anyone else's expectations pressing down on them. The moment that gave her away had not, she decided, been a betrayal. She had been ready. She simply had not known it yet. Sometimes that is how life works. The thing that finds you arrives not a moment too early and not a moment too late. You are standing in a corridor with a pile of towels, and someone looks at your hand, and 7 years of carefully built silence comes gently, and without force, to an end. She had spent years hiding who she was. She had not realized, until a quiet man in a hotel corridor said 3 words in her grandmother's dialect, that she had also, slowly, without meaning to, been hiding from herself.